The wind howled like a wounded beast, dragging red dust across the Arizona horizon. A lone rider pressed forward, his coat snapping behind him like a broken flag. Elias McGraw, tall in the saddle but bent by the weight of years, urged his tired bay horse through the storm. His face, half hidden beneath the brim of a weather-beaten hat, carried the deep scars of battles past. The sun, swollen and angry, bled into the desert sky, setting the world ablaze with fire and shadow. It was 1870, and the frontier offered no mercy to the weary. Elias's thoughts were as restless as the storm. Once he had been a Union scout, a man who tracked Apache camps through unforgiving wilderness, a man who spilled blood without hesitation. But that war had ended, leaving him adrift, haunted by the memory of dark eyes staring back at him from the shadows of the battlefield. Now he roamed cattle trails and empty canyons, not searching for riches or redemption, but simply trying to outrun the ghosts. The horse snorted uneasily, ears twitching. Something stirred ahead in the rocks. Elias slowed, his hand brushing the grip of his colt. The cry came suddenly, high, desperate, not the cry of an animal but of a child. He spurred forward, rounding the bend of a dry arroyo, and the scene burst upon him like a nightmare. Two Apache girls, no more than 12 and 9, were pressed against a boulder, their small bodies trembling. Around them circled a pack of wolves, lean and feral, ribs jutting from hunger. The largest of the beasts lunged, teeth bared, snarling. Dust and saliva sprayed as the girls screamed, one shielding the other with outstretched arms. Elias didn't think. Instinct took the reins. He drew his revolver, the steel flashing with the last shards of daylight. The first shot cracked, echoing across the canyon walls. A wolf spun, yelping, blood staining the sand. The others turned, growling, eyes burning yellow in the dusk. The horse reared as claws slashed at its flank. Elias slid from the saddle, rolling onto the hard ground, firing again. Another wolf dropped, tumbling into the dirt, but two more leapt, closing the distance. Teeth sank into his arm, the hot pain ripping through him. He roared, smashing the revolver's butt against the creature's skull until it released. The second wolf lunged for his throat. Elias barely brought the barrel up in time, the muzzle flashing inches from his own face. The beast collapsed across him, heavy and lifeless. He shoved it aside, chest heaving. The survivors slunk back, snarling, then scattered into the gathering dark. Silence fell, broken only by the rasp of Elias's breath. His shirt sleeve was soaked with blood, torn and ragged. He staggered to his feet, clutching the wound. The two girls remained frozen against the rock, their dark eyes wide, their lips pressed tight to hold in trembling sobs. For a moment, none of them moved. Elias lowered his weapon, his chest burning. "Easy now," he muttered, though he knew they couldn't understand his words. He had seen Apache children before, though never like this, never saved by his hand. Memories pressed on him, bitter and sharp. He wondered if they looked like the faces of those he had helped hunt years ago. Guilt twisted in his gut, his knees buckled, the pain in his arms surging. He stumbled, dropping to the ground. The world spun, shadows lengthening. He caught one last glimpse of the girls watching him, fear warring with something else, something softer, as if they were unsure whether this scarred white man was a savior or another kind of wolf. Then his vision blurred. When he woke, it was night. The cave smelled of damp stone and sage smoke. A fire crackled faintly, its light dancing on the walls. He shifted, wincing, and realized his arm had been bound with strips of cloth, smeared with some pungent herb paste. The girls sat nearby, their faces solemn in the firelight. One held a bundle of dry grass, feeding the flames. The other watched him with a gaze far too old for her years. They hadn't fled. They hadn't left him for the coyotes. Elias raised his eyes to them, his voice hoarse. "Why'd you help me?" he asked softly, though he knew the answer wouldn't come in words. The younger girl hesitated, then nudged a small clay bowl toward him. Water. Her hands shook as she offered it. But she didn't pull back when he took it. For the first time in years, Elias felt something break inside him, not the sharp snap of guilt, but the faint, fragile stir of trust. He drank, lowering the bowl slowly, meeting their eyes. The fire popped, echoing like distant gunshots in the cave. Outside, the storm raged on. Wind screamed across the rocks, carrying sand that hissed against the stone like 1,000 whispers. Elias leaned back against the cave wall, exhaustion pulling at him. The girls lay close together near the fire, their eyes heavy with sleep, but their bodies tense, as if the world could shatter at any sound. Then came the sound that froze the blood in his veins. Hoofbeats. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the storm. Riders. Shapes flickered beyond the cave mouth, dark figures swaying in the lightning's glare. Elias's hand crept toward his revolver, though his strength was fading. He glanced at the girls. Their eyes were wide, their breaths sharp. Friend or foe, he didn't know. But one truth cut through the storm like steel. The night was far from over. Dawn bled slow and gray into the canyon, washing the rocks with a pale light that carried more menace than comfort. The hoofbeats from the night before had not been a dream. As the storm faded, the figures outside revealed themselves. 3 men, riders with ragged coats and rifles slung across their shoulders, bandits, scavengers, the kind of men who sniffed out weakness like wolves did blood. Elias crouched low at the cave mouth, pressing his back against the cold stone. His revolver was heavy in his good hand, though his wounded arm throbbed with fever. Behind him, the girls clutched each other, their small breaths quick as a trapped bird's. He raised a finger to his lips. Silence. They understood. The bandits dismounted, their boots crunching over gravel. One carried a rope. Another spat into the dirt and laughed. Their voices carried sharp through the morning stillness. "Apache brats," one sneered. "Worth something to the right buyer." The others chuckled, their words dripping cruelty. Elias's jaw tightened. Once, not long ago, he might have stood alongside men like these, scouts who justified cruelty with orders, who looked at native children and saw only leverage or bounty. Now, standing between these girls and the monsters outside, he felt the full weight of his sins pressing on him like a chain. The men drew closer to the cave. Elias shifted, moving the girls deeper into the shadows, guiding them with the slightest push of his hand. They obeyed, their dark eyes watching him with a mix of terror and faith. The bandits peered inside. One lifted his rifle, voice mocking. "Come on out, little ones. We won't hurt you." Elias stepped into view. His revolver was steady, though his hand trembled from fever. The men froze. Recognition flickered in their eyes. He was no helpless drifter, but a man carved from gun smoke and scars. "Back away," Elias said, his voice low, edged with steel. They smirked. "Ain't your fight, old man," one growled. "Everything here's my fight," Elias answered. For a tense heartbeat, no one moved. Then the men spread out, flanking the cave. Elias knew he couldn't win in a straight gunfight. Not with his wound, not with the girls at his back. He needed cunning, not brute force. He slipped deeper into the cave, dragging his boot deliberately across loose stones, making noise. Then he fired a single shot into the rock ceiling. Dust and fragments rained down, echoing like a landslide. The bandits cursed, stumbling backward, thinking the whole cave might collapse. Elias used the chaos, emerging suddenly at the side entrance, revolver aimed square at the leader's chest. "Run!" Elias barked. His eyes burned with the kind of fury only men near death could summon. The bandits faltered. One spat, but all 3 retreated, muttering threats as they mounted their horses and rode off in a haze of dust. Elias lowered the gun slowly, his breath ragged. When he turned, the girls were staring at him. They had seen the violence, the blood in his eyes, but also the restraint. He could have killed those men. Instead, he let them go. Their gaze lingered on him as if trying to reconcile what he was. A white man who carried the power of death in his hand, yet who chose not to use it. The day dragged heavy. Hunger gnawed at them, and Elias's arm burned with infection. Sweat chilled his skin. They wandered from the cave, following the canyon's dry bed in search of water. The land was merciless, sun beating down, rocks jagged, the silence broken only by distant crows. It was the girls who saved them. The older one, eyes sharp, paused at a cluster of tracks in the dirt, tiny prints winding toward a patch of scrub. Rabbits. She signaled with her hands, crouching low. Elias watched as she set a snare from twisted grass and a bent twig. Hours later, the trap snapped, and they had meat. That evening, the younger girl dug roots from beneath a mesquite, showing Elias how to chew them for strength. They shared the food without a word, but in their silence was something stronger than speech. Survival became their language. As night fell, Elias sat apart, staring at the horizon, guilt gnawing him raw. Once he'd burned villages, scattering families like these into the wilderness. Now he sat eating their food, saved by their hands. The irony bit deeper than any wolf's fangs. The girls approached quietly. The older one carried something small in her palm, a beaded charm necklace, simple but carefully made. She knelt beside him, meeting his eyes, and placed it in his good hand. He stared down at it, the firelight glinting off its colored beads. His throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to tell her she was wrong to trust him, that his hands were stained beyond cleansing. But no words came. All he could do was close his fist gently around the gift, nodding once, as if swearing an oath he didn't know how to keep. The night deepened. The fire cast long, shifting shadows on the canyon walls. The girls slept curled together, and Elias sat with the shotgun across his knees, every nerve strung tight. Then he heard it, the sound he had feared all day. Horses. More this time. The bandits had returned, and they weren't laughing now. Voices carried low, hard, promising blood. Elias rose, his body heavy with fever and fatigue, yet his eyes cold with resolve. He moved to the fire, feeding it until it blazed higher, throwing sharp light against the cave walls. He wanted them to see the silhouette of a man ready for war. He checked the shotgun, feeling its weight settle in his grip. His revolver lay at his side. The night pulsed with tension, the air thick as iron. Outside, the bandits dismounted, footsteps crunching closer. The girls stirred awake, fear flashing in their eyes. Elias looked back at them, his expression grim but steady. He gave the smallest nod. Stay low, stay silent. Shadows flickered at the cave mouth, shapes of men closing in. The firelight danced over Elias's scarred face as he raised the shotgun, breath slow and measured. The storm had passed, but another one was coming, fiercer than the last. And this time he knew there would be no mercy. The night pressed in close, thick with smoke and menace. Elias steadied the shotgun, the firelight painting his scarred face in harsh relief. Shapes moved at the cave mouth, bandits creeping closer, rifles raised, their voices hissing like snakes. His body burned with fever, but his hands held steady. He was ready to sell his life for the girls, and he knew the price would be steep. The first shot cracked. Sparks leapt from the muzzle of Elias's gun, the blast booming in the confined space. One bandit fell with a scream, clutching his leg. Another cursed and ducked back. The cave echoed with thunder, smoke thickening the air. Elias reloaded, teeth clenched against the stabbing pain in his arm. They came harder. Bullets sparked against the stone. The girls pressed against the back wall, whimpering but silent. Elias dropped one more outlaw with a revolver shot, but the others closed in, shadows crawling through the firelight. His chest heaved. He was running out of ammunition. Running out of strength. Then, another sound cut through the chaos. A sharp twang, followed by a scream. One bandit staggered back, an arrow jutting from his chest. Another fell with a gurgle, a shaft buried deep in his throat. From the darkness beyond the firelight stepped a figure, a woman, her hair long and black, whipped in the wind. Her eyes burned like embers, her bow drawn smooth as water. She moved with deadly grace, loosing arrow after arrow, each finding its mark with merciless precision. The surviving bandits panicked. "Apache!" one shouted, scrambling for his horse. Within moments, the canyon floor was littered with the groans of the wounded and the silence of the dead. The rest fled into the night, hooves pounding in retreat. The girls cried out, not in fear but in recognition. They scrambled from the cave, rushing to the woman, wrapping their arms around her waist. She dropped her bow, her hand resting protectively on their dark hair. Elias staggered out into the night, shotgun dangling useless at his side. His eyes fixed on her. This had to be their mother. He felt it in the way the children clung to her, in the way her gaze never left him, hard as flint. He expected rage. He expected her to notch another arrow and drive it straight through his heart. After all, men like him had brought fire and sorrow to her people. He was the enemy. He braced himself for judgment. But Nalin, he somehow knew that was her name, though she had not spoken it, only studied him. Her expression was unreadable, a storm held behind still water. She saw the blood on his sleeve, the exhaustion in his stance, the bodies of the men he had fought off. And she saw her daughters alive, unbroken, standing there because of him. The silence stretched long, broken only by the crackle of the dying fire. Then she moved toward him. Elias tensed, his grip tightening on the shotgun, though he knew he could not lift it. She stopped a few feet away. From a leather satchel at her side, she withdrew something wrapped in deer hide. She unrolled it with deliberate care. Inside lay a blade, obsidian, black as midnight, its edge sharp as glass. The handle was bound with red-dyed sinew, etched with patterns that spoke of generations. The firelight danced across its surface, casting eerie shadows. Nalin held it out to him, not as a weapon raised in threat, but as an offering. Elias stared at it, confusion knotting his chest. His lips parted. "What in God's name?" Her voice was low, broken with the effort of English. "You took blood for them. Now you carry honor." He did not reach for it. He couldn't. His hands shook, not from weakness, but from the weight of what she was asking. He had hunted her people once, carried rifles and torches into their homes. Now she stood before him, giving him something sacred. The girls watched, their eyes wide, waiting. Slowly, Elias extended his hand. The obsidian blade pressed into his palm, heavier than any weapon he had ever held. It was not a gift. It was a burden, a bond, a reminder that he would never again stand apart from what he had chosen tonight. His throat closed. "I don't deserve this." Nalin's eyes narrowed, but there was no anger. Only truth. "Deserve or not, it is yours." She turned back to the girls, ushering them closer to the fire. Elias sank against a rock, staring down at the blade, feeling as though it burned through his flesh. He thought of the faces of Apache men he had seen fall in battle, of children dragged from camps, of screams carried on the wind. And now he carried their honor? It twisted something deep inside him. Later, as the fire snapped low, they shared the silence of survival. The girls slept curled beside their mother, safe for the first time in days. Elias sat across from Nalin, the blade across his lap. Neither spoke. But in her eyes, steady and unflinching, he felt her measuring him, testing him. Not with words, but with silence heavier than any accusation. And in his silence, he gave her his answer. Not with apology, not with excuses, but by enduring her gaze without flinching. The night deepened. Coyotes howled across the ridges. Elias's fever broke in sweat, his body trembling. Still, he stayed upright, the shotgun close, the obsidian closer. A fragile alliance had been forged in fire and blood. Then, from far off, the sound tore through the quiet, a rifle crack echoing through the canyon. Another then another. The bandits hadn't given up. They were regrouping. Elias lifted his eyes to Nalin. She was already reaching for her bow. The night was not done testing them. The true storm was coming. Dawn came like a blade across the canyon rim, slicing through the shadows with cold, merciless light. The wind carried dust and the faint creak of saddles. Elias knew before he saw them, more riders. The bandits had returned, and this time they came in force. The first gunshot cracked the morning wide open. Dirt spat against the rocks where Elias crouched. Another shot followed, then a chorus of war cries. The canyon erupted in chaos. Elias slammed his back against the stone, shotgun ready. "Stay down," he barked, though the girls already clung low behind a boulder. His heart pounded like a war drum. Nalin was already moving, bow in hand. She slipped between rocks like smoke, loosing arrows with terrifying precision. One man tumbled from his saddle, another dropped, clutching his throat. She did not hesitate. She did not miss. The bandits poured into the canyon, rifles flashing, boots thundering. Elias leaned from cover, the shotgun bucking hard against his shoulder. One rider spun from the saddle, the horse bolting wild. Another fell into the dust, screaming. Still they came. The girls pressed tight together, but they did not hide entirely. The older one darted forward, tugging at Elias's sleeve, pressing spare cartridges into his hand. The younger one scattered loose rocks near the fire, distracting a bandit who stumbled, giving Nalin the second she needed to drop him. Brave, foolish, but brave! Elias roared, firing again and again, smoke choking the air. His vision blurred with fever and exhaustion, but he fought on. Each pull of the trigger felt like the last. A bullet grazed his temple. Another tore into his side, hot and cruel. He staggered, the world tilting. He dropped to one knee, vision tunneling, the shotgun slipping. The girls screamed. He thought it was the last sound he'd ever hear. He lifted his revolver, weak but steady. One last shot, one last stand. Redemption through death. He welcomed it. But before the bandit could fire, an arrow hissed past Elias's cheek. It struck the attacker square in the chest. The man dropped, lifeless. Nalin stood in the open now, bow drawn, eyes burning. She had saved him. She had chosen him. The battle raged on. Elias forced himself up, teeth bared. Side by side with Nalin, he fought, the rhythm of gun and bow a strange, savage harmony. Bullets tore through dust. Arrows whispered death. Horses screamed. Men fell. And then, silence. Only one bandit remained. Their leader. Broad-shouldered, his face cut with scars, his revolver aimed steady at Elias. Elias raised his own, breath ragged. For a long moment, they stared across the dust and bodies. The girls watched, eyes wide. Nalin's bow was drawn, but waiting. The leader sneered. "Do it, old man!" "End it." Elias's finger tightened. Every instinct screamed to kill, to finish it, to silence the threat forever. That was the way of the frontier. That was the way of survival. But he thought of the girls, of the beaded necklace in his pocket, of the obsidian blade heavy at his side, of Nalin's eyes watching him not with rage but with expectation. He lowered the gun. The leader blinked, stunned. Nalin's arrow stayed taut, ready if needed. But Elias stepped forward, voice low. "Go. Don't come back." The man hesitated, then spat into the dirt. Without another word, he turned and mounted his horse, riding hard from the canyon. The silence that followed was heavier than the battle itself. Elias sank to the ground, clutching his bleeding side. He had spared a man. For the first time in years, he had chosen restraint over death. It felt strange, heavy, but right. The girls rushed to him, helping steady his arm. Their faces were streaked with dust and fear, but their eyes held something else now. Trust. Nalin approached slowly. She knelt before him, studying his wounds, his eyes, his trembling hands. Then she reached into her satchel once more and placed the obsidian blade back into his palm, pressing it firmly until his fist closed around it. "You carry it," she said, her voice rough but steady. "Now you carry us." He didn't understand all of it, but he felt the weight. It was not just a weapon. It was a bond, a burden, an honor he could never deserve, but one he could no longer deny. Nalin gathered her daughters, speaking softly in their tongue. The girls clung to her, then looked back at Elias, eyes lingering. One raised her small hand in farewell. Elias tried to speak, but no words came. His throat was thick, his chest raw. He only nodded once, slow, heavy. He watched as they disappeared into the wilderness, their figures swallowed by the rising sun. For a long time, he sat in the silence of the canyon. The smoke drifted. The wind carried away the cries of battle. Only the dead remained, and the living silence. At last, Elias rose. His horse stood tethered, waiting. He mounted, the motion stiff with pain. The obsidian blade rested in his saddlebag, its weight undeniable. He rode slow, the canyon walls rising high around him, the echoes of the fight fading behind. The sun climbed higher, lighting the dust in golden fire. Elias looked ahead, the horizon endless, his heart heavy with ghosts. But there was something else inside him now, something fragile, something alive. Trust. It would never erase the blood on his hands, but it was a start. He rode on, a lone figure against the blazing sky, the obsidian blade glinting as the sun caught it. Both curse and blessing, both burden and hope, and the story closed not with triumph, but with the bittersweet weight of survival. Narrator's voice, low and steady. In the Wild West, survival was never just a battle against bullets and hunger. It was a battle for the soul. Elias McGraw had fought the wilderness, the outlaws, and himself. In saving 2 Apache children, he found something he thought forever lost: honor and the fragile bond of trust. A gift heavier than steel, sharper than any blade. Pause. If Elias's story moved you, if you felt the weight of his journey, don't let it fade. Like, comment, and subscribe for more Wild West tales of survival, redemption, and the bonds that rise in the dust of the frontier.